The metal floor beneath Marcus Chin's boots vibrated with each heavy footstep of his Zephyrian captors. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eye, mixing with sweat as he stumbled forward through the dimly lit corridors of what he assumed was their prison ship. The aliens flanking him stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled skin glistening under harsh artificial lights, and their 4 arms each ending in razor-sharp claws that had already proven their effectiveness during his capture. Marcus had been a reconnaissance pilot for the Terran Defense Force, flying solo missions behind enemy lines when his ship's engines failed over the contested moon of Kepler 442b. The Zephyrians had found him, within hours, unconscious in his crashed fighter's cockpit. Now, 3 days later, he was being marched toward what his captors kept calling the final cell in their guttural, clicking language that his universal translator struggled to interpret fully. The corridor opened into a vast detention area filled with dozens of containment cells, each one housing different alien species that Marcus didn't recognize. Some creatures cowered in corners while others pressed against the energy barriers that served as cell doors, their eyes tracking the procession with desperate hunger or curiosity. The air reeked of ozone from the energy fields and something else Marcus couldn't identify, something organic and ancient. "Human scum," hissed the lead Zephyrian in broken standard, his translator crackling with static. "You go to special place. Very special." The aliens' mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of cruel laughter. "Our pet is hungry. Has been hungry for many cycles." They stopped before a cell that dwarfed all the others, its energy barrier flickering with red warning lights. Beyond the translucent field, Marcus could make out movement in the shadows, something massive shifting in the darkness. The cell's interior seemed to extend far deeper than the others, disappearing into blackness that the corridor's lights couldn't penetrate. "Your species thinks itself superior," the Zephyrian continued, his 4 arms working controls on a nearby panel. "Thinks it can challenge the Confederacy. We show you truth. We show you fear." The energy barrier flickered and died, leaving only darkness beyond the threshold. Marcus felt rough claws grab his arms, propelling him forward. He tried to resist, digging his heels into the metal floor, but the alien's strength was overwhelming. They shoved him through the doorway, and immediately the barrier snapped back to life behind him, trapping him in the suffocating darkness. For several long moments, Marcus stood perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs as his eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The cell was enormous, perhaps 100 meters in each direction, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow. Strange, luminescent fungi grew in patches along the walls, providing the only source of dim, blue-green light. Then he heard it, a sound like distant thunder. Rhythmic and deep, breathing. Something moved in the far corner, and Marcus's blood turned to ice. A massive shape uncoiled from the shadows, revealing scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. A head the size of a small vehicle emerged first, followed by a neck that seemed to stretch on forever. Golden eyes, each the size of dinner plates, fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that was both alien and terrifyingly ancient. It was a dragon. Not the mythological creatures from Earth's legends, but something far more real and infinitely more dangerous. The being stood nearly 20 feet tall at the shoulder, with 4 powerful legs ending in claws that could easily shred steel. Massive wings were folded against its sides, and spines ran along its back like a mountain range. When it opened its mouth, revealing teeth like sword blades, the temperature in the cell seemed to drop several degrees. "Another offering," the dragon spoke, its voice resonating through Marcus's chest like the toll of a massive bell. The creature's standard was perfect, without any trace of accent or translator interference. "The Zephyrians seem to think I require constant feeding." Marcus forced himself to stand straighter, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "I'm not food," he managed, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I'm a prisoner of war." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, studying him with those molten gold eyes. "Prisoner of war? How quaint. What war could your fragile species possibly wage against the Confederacy?" The creature took a step forward, each footfall causing the metal floor to groan. "I am Zythrax, last of the Draconis Imperium. I've been imprisoned here for 300 of your years. In that time, I have consumed representatives of 47 different species. You would be the first human. Then you'll be disappointed, Marcus replied, taking an involuntary step backward as the dragon's head lowered to his eye level. The creature's breath was surprisingly warm, smelling of ozone and something metallic. Humans don't go down easy. Zythrax made a sound that might have been laughter, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. They all say something similar before the end. The proud Altarians claim their warrior spirit would protect them. The telepathic Mindari insisted their psychic abilities would save them. The crystalline Zeftans believed their diamond-hard skin made them invulnerable. The dragon's lips pulled back in what could generously be called a smile. They were all equally wrong. Marcus looked around the cell, noting the scratches in the walls and the darker stains on the floor that he preferred not to think about too carefully. Why do they keep feeding you prisoners? Seems like a waste of resources. Entertainment? Zythrax replied simply. Zephyrians enjoy watching fear. They record everything for their amusement networks. Sometimes they place bets on how long a prisoner will survive. The dragon settled into a sitting position, though even seated. Its head remained well above Marcus's. The current record is held by a Mecanian warrior who lasted nearly 2 of your hours before succumbing. 2 hours? Marcus felt a spark of something, not hope exactly, but determination. That's it? That's it, the dragon confirmed. Though, in fairness, most last considerably less. The Trilaxian ambassador managed only 14 minutes, and he was supposedly trained in combat. Marcus began pacing the length of the cell, his mind racing. The dragon watched him with apparent amusement, making no move to attack. The creature seemed content to toy with its prey, which bought Marcus time to think. He'd spent his entire adult life training for impossible situations, learning to find advantages where none seemed to exist. Tell me about this Imperium of yours, Marcus said suddenly, stopping his pacing to face the dragon directly. What happened to it? Zythrax's golden eyes narrowed. Why would you waste your final moments on ancient history? Because, Marcus replied, meeting that terrible gaze without flinching, if we're going to be cellmates, we might as well get to know each other. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, Marcus standing defiant before the massive dragon while Zythrax processed his unexpected response. No prey had ever asked about the Imperium. No prisoner had ever suggested they might be cellmates rather than a meal. Cellmates? Zythrax repeated slowly, tasting the word. You truly believe you can survive in here with me? Marcus shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both casualness and determination. I've survived worse odds. Lost in a blizzard. On Titan for 6 days with nothing but emergency rations. Crash landed on a planet where everything, including the plants, was trying to kill me. Humans are surprisingly hard to kill when we put our minds to it. The dragon's head tilted again, those massive eyes studying Marcus with renewed interest. The Draconis Imperium ruled 17 star systems for over 2 millennia. Zythrax began, his voice taking on a different quality, less predatory, more melancholy. We were not conquerors in the traditional sense. We were guardians, protectors. Other species came to us for wisdom, for justice, for protection from threats they couldn't handle themselves. Marcus found a relatively clean section of wall and leaned against it, settling in for what he hoped would be a long story. What kind? Oh, threats? The void spawn, Zythrax replied, and even speaking the name seemed to cause him physical pain. Creatures from the space between dimensions. They would slip through tears in reality and devour entire worlds, consuming not just the life on them, but the very essence of existence itself. Planets they touched would simply cease, not destroyed, not dead, but as if they had never been. And your people stopped them? For 2,000 years, yes. We patrolled the dimensional barriers, sealed the rifts, fought battles that lasted decades in the void between stars. The dragon's wings rustled slightly. But the Confederacy saw us as a threat. Too powerful, too independent. They couldn't control us, so they decided to eliminate us. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cell's temperature. How? They made a deal with the Void Spawn, Zythrax said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than his normal tone. Offered them a way into our dimension if they would help destroy the Imperium. The fools thought they could control entities that existed before the universe began. I'm guessing that didn't work out well for anyone. The Void Spawn kept their bargain. They helped the Confederacy's fleets destroy our worlds, consume our people. But once they had tasted this reality, they wanted more. The Confederacy found themselves fighting a war on two fronts, finishing off the remaining dragons while trying to contain the very entities they had unleashed. Marcus pushed himself off the wall, pacing again. So what happened? Obviously, the Confederacy survived, but what about these Void Spawn? The last survivors of my people performed the Great Sealing, Zythrax explained. They sacrificed themselves to create barriers that would hold the Void Spawn back for a time. But those barriers weaken with each passing year. The Confederacy knows this, but they've grown complacent. They think technology can solve any problem. And you? How did you end up here instead of sacrificing yourself with the others? For the first time since Marcus had entered the cell, Zythrax looked truly vulnerable. I was captured 3 days before the Great Sealing. I have spent every moment since then knowing that I could have made the difference. That if I had been there, the barriers might have been strong enough to last forever instead of merely centuries. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face the dragon directly. How long do the barriers have left? Perhaps 50 of your years, maybe less. Zythrax's golden eyes met Marcus's. When they fail, the Void Spawn will pour into this dimension like water through a broken dam. Every world, every species, every spark of life will be consumed. The universe itself will become empty, cold, and forgotten. But you know how to fix it. It wasn't a question, and Zythrax's surprised expression confirmed Marcus's suspicion. How could you possibly... Because that's what humans do, Marcus interrupted. We fix impossible problems. We find solutions where none exist. And right now, you're the only one who knows how to stop the end of everything. He gestured around the cell. Which means keeping you alive and getting you out of here isn't just about survival anymore. It's about saving the universe. Zythrax was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with those ancient eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note that hadn't been there before: hope. The sealing requires specific knowledge, ancient formulas, and... He paused. It requires sacrifice. Not just of life, but of something far more precious. What? Freedom, Zythrax replied. To perform the Great Sealing, one must bind themselves to the dimensional barriers permanently. They become part of the wall between realities, conscious but trapped forever in the space between dimensions. It is not death, it is something far worse. Marcus felt the weight of that revelation settle on his shoulders. And you're the only one who knows how to do it. I am the last keeper of the deep knowledge, Zythrax confirmed. The formulas died with my people. The techniques, the sacred words, the precise ritual requirements, all of it exists only in my memory. Then we need to get you out of here. Zythrax made that rumbling sound that might have been laughter again. Human, this cell has held me for 3 centuries. The energy barriers are keyed specifically to my biorhythms. The walls are reinforced with materials that could withstand a supernova. The Zephyrians built this prison specifically to contain a dragon. But they didn't build it to contain a human, Marcus pointed out. They didn't plan for a partnership. Partnership? Zythrax's massive head lowered until he was eye level with Marcus again. You would truly help me escape? Knowing that success would mean you could never return to your own kind? That we would be fugitives hunted across the galaxy? Marcus thought about his crashed fighter, about the war raging across human space, about the billions of lives hanging in the balance. But more than that, he thought about what his father had taught him when he was young, that sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything you wanted for something more important. I signed up to defend humanity, Marcus said quietly. Turns out humanity is part of a much bigger picture than I realized. If helping you means saving everyone, then yeah, I'm in. Zythrax stared at him for what felt like an eternity before slowly extending one massive claw. It took Marcus a moment to realize the dragon was offering to shake hands. He reached out and grasped the claw, his entire hand disappearing within the dragon's grip. "Then we have an accord," Zythrax rumbled. "Though I should warn you, escaping is only the beginning. Even if we manage to leave this place, we will need to reach the nexus point before the barriers fail completely. And the nexus point is located in the most heavily guarded system in Confederacy space." "Where exactly?" "The galactic core," Zythrax replied. "At the heart of a black hole where space and time bend back on themselves. Where the original tier between dimensions first appeared billions of years ago." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Of course it is. It couldn't be somewhere convenient like a nice peaceful moon." "The most important things never are," Zythrax agreed. "But first we must deal with our more immediate problem." "Which is?" "The feeding time approaches," the dragon explained. "The Zephyrians will expect to find your remains when they check the cell. We need to convince them that I have devoured you completely while keeping you very much alive." Marcus grinned, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with impossible odds. Good thing humans are excellent at playing dead. Marcus spent the next hour learning exactly how much his body could contort. Zythrax had explained that dragons possessed internal storage chambers, evolutionary holdovers from their ancestors who needed to transport large objects across vast distances. The chamber was located just behind the dragon's secondary heart, accessible through the throat but completely isolated from the digestive system. "This is either the most brilliant escape plan ever conceived," Marcus muttered as he practiced. "The breathing exercises Zythrax had taught him, or the stupidest way to die in the history of the universe." "Both assessments could prove accurate," Zythrax replied dryly. "The chamber has its own air supply, but it was designed for cargo, not living beings. You will have perhaps 20 minutes of consciousness before the atmosphere becomes too thin to sustain human life." Marcus nodded, checking the makeshift breathing apparatus they had constructed from strips of his uniform. "And you're absolutely certain you can do this without, accidentally digesting me?" "The risk is minimal," Zythrax assured him, though his tone suggested the risk was anything but minimal. "I have complete control over my internal systems. The greater danger lies in convincing the Zephyrians that I have actually consumed you." They had spent considerable time planning that part of the deception. Zythrax would use his claws to shred Marcus's outer uniform, leaving convincing evidence of struggle. The dragon's saliva contained enzymes that would simulate digestive processes when applied to organic materials. Most importantly, Zythrax would regurgitate a small amount of blood his own, mixed with fabric scraps to provide the Zephyrians with the evidence they expected. "Here they come," Zythrax whispered, his enhanced hearing detecting the approach of guards long before Marcus could hear anything. "Remember, once you are inside, remain as still as possible. Any sudden movement could trigger involuntary reflexes." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "What happens if they decide to scan you? Some kind of medical examination?" "Highly unlikely," Zythrax replied. "The Zephyrians fear me too much to come close enough for detailed scanning. They will observe from a safe distance and trust their eyes." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the detention area. Marcus quickly began tearing strips from his uniform while Zythrax used his claws to create realistic-looking gouges in the fabric. The dragon's saliva, when applied to the cloth, began breaking down the fibers immediately, creating the appearance of partial digestion. "They're at the observation post," Zythrax murmured. "Positions." Marcus lay down on the cell floor, spreading the torn fabric around himself and smearing some of Zythrax's blood on his face and hands. To any observer, it would look like the aftermath of a violent struggle. Zythrax loomed over him, opening his massive jaws wide. "Last chance to reconsider," the dragon whispered. "Just try not to chew," Marcus replied, then held his breath as Zythrax's head descended. The dragon's mouth was surprisingly warm, and Marcus was grateful for the breathing apparatus as he was carefully lifted from the floor. Zythrax's tongue, larger than Marcus's entire torso, gently guided him toward the back of the throat. sensation of being swallowed by a creature large enough to house a small apartment was indescribable and thoroughly terrifying. Then Marcus felt himself sliding downward, but not into a stomach. Instead, he found himself in a chamber that felt more like a cave, its walls smooth and slightly warm. Bioluminescent patches provided a dim, blue-green glow, and the air, while thin, was breathable. He could hear Zethrax's heartbeats, all three of them, like distant thunder surrounding him, through the dragon's body. Marcus could hear muffled voices speaking in the clicking language of the Zephyrians. Zythrax responded with low rumbles that vibrated through the chamber walls. The conversation seemed to last forever, with Marcus counting each precious minute of his limited air supply. Finally, the voices faded and Zythrax spoke in a subsonic whisper that Marcus felt more than heard. "They are satisfied. The guards have returned to their posts. We have perhaps 6 hours before the next security check." Marcus activated the small communication device they had fashioned from components of his universal translator. "How long until you can get me out of here?" "Soon, but first I must prepare for the next phase of our escape." Zithrax's voice came through the improvised speaker with surprising clarity. "While you were indisposed, I noticed something interesting about the guards' equipment. They are carrying new models of energy weapons far more advanced than what the Confederacy typically uses." "What does that mean?" "It means we may not be the only ones planning an escape," Zythrax replied. "There are rumors, whispers among the prisoners, of a resistance movement within the Confederacy itself. Groups who oppose their current leadership and their methods." Marcus felt a spark of hope. Allies? Potentially. But we must be cautious. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford until we know more about their intentions. Zythrax paused. "I'm going to begin the regurgitation process. Prepare yourself." The journey back up was considerably less pleasant than the journey down. But Marcus emerged from the dragon's mouth covered in saliva and gasping for fresh air. He quickly cleaned himself off and checked their improvised equipment while Zythrax disposed of the torn fabric and blood evidence. "The air circulation system," Zythrax said without preamble. "I have been observing it for centuries, and I believe I have identified a weakness. The main ventilation shaft passes directly over this cell. If we could access it." Marcus looked up at the ceiling, noting the barely visible outline of an air vent high above. "That's got to be 30 feet up, and I'm willing to bet it's heavily reinforced." "The reinforcement is designed to prevent escape from the outside," Zythrax explained. "But if one were already inside the ventilation system, the barriers would be far less formidable. The challenge lies in reaching it without triggering the cell's sensors." "I'm guessing the sensors are motion-activated?" "Among other things, yes. But they are calibrated for my mass and energy signature. A human moving carefully might avoid detection." Marcus studied the walls, looking for handholds or any means of climbing. The smooth metal surface offered no obvious purchase points. "Even if I could somehow reach the vent, how would you follow? You're not exactly built for crawling through air ducts." Zythrax's massive head turned toward one corner of the cell, where the shadows seemed deeper than elsewhere. "There is another way. This cell was not always a prison. Before the Zephyrians converted it, it served as a cargo hold for a massive transport ship. The original loading mechanisms are still intact, simply hidden behind false walls." Marcus followed the dragon's gaze and noticed what he had initially dismissed as damage to the wall subtle lines that might indicate hidden panels. "A cargo loading system would have external access points." "Precisely. If we could activate the mechanisms, we might be able to create an opening large enough for both of us to escape." "What's powering those mechanisms after all this time?" "The ship's main reactor," Zythrax replied. "The same reactor that powers this prison. The Zephyrians never bothered to disconnect the cargo systems. They simply sealed them behind barriers and forgot they existed." Marcus moved closer to the corner, running his hands along the wall until he found the nearly invisible seams. "How do we activate them without alerting the guards?" "We don't," Zythrax said simply. "When we activate the cargo systems, every alarm on this ship will sound. We will have perhaps 90 seconds to escape before the entire Confederacy fleet responds to the emergency." "90 seconds to get off a heavily armed prison ship and disappear into space," Marcus mused. "Without a ship of our own." "Oh, but we will have a ship," Zythrak said, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been a smile. "The Zephyrians keep a small fleet of pursuit craft docked directly below us. Fast, maneuverable, and designed for long-range operations." Marcus felt that familiar surge of adrenaline. "You're talking about stealing a ship while escaping from a maximum security prison, while every alarm in the system is screaming, and while you're a 30-foot dragon who probably doesn't fit in the cockpit?" "The cockpits are designed to accommodate Zephyrian physiology," Zythrax pointed out. "They are quite spacious, and I have had 3 centuries to study the ship's layout and security systems." "Right," Marcus said, moving to examine the hidden panels more closely. "So our plan is to fake my death, activate ancient cargo mechanisms, steal a ship, and escape into space with the entire Confederacy Navy chasing us." "When you summarize it like that," Zythrax admitted, "it does sound rather ambitious." Marcus grinned as he found what appeared to be a control interface hidden behind one of the panels. "Ambitious is my specialty. But first, let me ask you something. Exactly how much do you know about human military tactics?" Zythrax considered Marcus's question carefully, his ancient eyes reflecting the dim light from the bioluminescent fungi. "In my studies of various species, I have observed that humans possess an unusual tendency to employ tactics that other races consider irrational." "Irrational is a polite way of putting it," Marcus replied, examining the hidden control interface. The symbols were clearly Zephyrian, but the underlying technology appeared to be much older. "We call it adaptive insanity. When conventional tactics fail, we start breaking rules until something works." "An interesting philosophy," Zythrax mused. "The Draconis Imperium valued careful planning and overwhelming force. It served us well for 2 millennia. "Right up until it didn't," Marcus pointed out, not unkindly. "Sometimes the best plan is to do something so completely unexpected that your enemy can't possibly prepare for it." Marcus had been working on the control panel for 20 minutes, carefully tracing circuit pathways and identifying power conduits. The technology was ancient but well preserved, and he was beginning to understand its function. More importantly, he was starting to formulate a plan that went far beyond simple escape. "Zythrax, these cargo loading systems, they're not just for moving freight, are they? This is a materials transport system designed for heavy construction work. Orbital platform assembly, asteroid mining, that sort of thing." "Correct," the dragon confirmed. "This vessel once served as a mobile construction base for the Confederacy's early expansion efforts. The cargo systems were designed to manipulate objects weighing thousands of tons." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. "And the control systems for these cargo mechanisms, they're tied into the ship's main computer network?" "They would have to be for coordination purposes." "Why do you ask?" "Because I think we can do a lot more than just escape," Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone that his commanding officers had learned to recognize as dangerous. "How much do you know about this ship's current mission?" Zythrax's massive head tilted in curiosity. "It serves as a mobile prison for the Confederacy's most dangerous captives." "Why?" "Because mobile prisons need to visit multiple locations," Marcus explained, pulling up what appeared to be a navigation interface on the hidden panel. "They pick up prisoners from various capture points and transport them to permanent facilities." "Which means this ship has been to a lot of places and has detailed navigation data for all of them." The dragon's eyes widened as he began to understand. "Including the locations of Confederacy military installations, supply depots, and command centers." "Exactly. And if this ship were to suddenly develop critical system failures at just the right moment?" Marcus let the implications hang in the air. "You want to turn this prison ship into a weapon," Zythrax said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "Not exactly," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing over the alien controls as he accessed deeper system levels. "I want to turn it into a message. A very loud, very public message that the Confederacy isn't as invincible as everyone thinks." Marcus had found what he was looking for, the ship's prisoner manifest and transport schedule. According to the data, they were currently carrying representatives from over 60 different species, many of them political prisoners and resistance leaders. More importantly, the ship was scheduled to dock at 3 major Confederacy installations over the next week, including a propaganda broadcast facility that transmitted to over 200 systems. The Zephyrians used this ship to demonstrate their power, Marcus explained. They parade their captives in front of cameras, showing the galaxy what happens to those who oppose the Confederacy. But what if, instead of a demonstration of power, it became a demonstration of weakness? Zythrax was beginning to catch on. You propose to free the other prisoners? All of them, Marcus confirmed. But not just free them, arm them, organize them, and turn this ship into a mobile rebellion. Think about it. A Confederacy prison ship suddenly appears at a major installation, broadcasting messages of resistance across the galaxy, while demonstrating that their most secure facility can be taken by the very prisoners they're supposed to be holding. The symbolic impact would be enormous, Zythrax agreed. But the practical challenges are significant but not impossible, Marcus finished. The key is timing and coordination. We need to free the prisoners gradually without alerting the guards. We need to identify natural leaders among the captives who can help organize the others. And we need to modify the ship's systems so we can take control at the critical moment. Marcus pulled up a schematic of the ship's detention areas. There were 12 major cell blocks, each housing between 20 and 50 prisoners. The guards numbered approximately 200, but they were spread throughout the massive vessel and relied heavily on automated systems for actual security. The automated systems are our biggest advantage, Marcus continued. The Zephyrians trust their technology implicitly. If we can convince the computers that everything is normal while we systematically take control of the ship, we'll have the element of surprise right up until the moment we need it. And after we take control, Zythrax asked, the Confederacy will respond with overwhelming force. Which is where your knowledge becomes crucial, Marcus said. You know, things about the Confederacy that they've tried very hard to forget. The deal with the void spawn, the weakening barriers, the coming apocalypse. Information like that, broadcast across the galaxy, could turn their own people against them. Zythrax was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. You realize that such actions would make us enemies of every government in known space? Even species that oppose the Confederacy would likely view us as dangerous terrorists. But probably, Marcus agreed. But if the alternative is the end of the universe, I'm willing to be the bad guy. There is another consideration, Zythrax added. Among the prisoners in this ship, there may be individuals with knowledge that could prove crucial to repairing the dimensional barriers. The Confederacy has been hunting down anyone with expertise in ancient technologies or dimensional sciences. Marcus felt a thrill of excitement. You think there might be other survivors here? People who could help with the Great Sealing? It's possible. The Confederacy has been very thorough in their efforts to suppress any knowledge related to the old sciences. If they captured scholars or researchers in that field, this ship would be a logical place to hold them. Then we need to identify them first, Marcus decided. Before we make any moves, we need to know exactly who we're working with. He turned back to the control interface, accessing the prisoner database. Let's see what we're dealing with. The list that appeared made Marcus whistle softly. Among, the prisoners were 3 former Confederacy scientists who had been arrested for dangerous research, a historian who specialized in pre-Confederacy civilizations, 2 engineers who had worked on experimental propulsion systems, and most intriguingly, someone listed only as Scholar of the Deep Paths with no species designation. Scholar of the Deep Paths, Zythrax read over his shoulder, and Marcus heard something like hope in the dragon's voice. That is an ancient title, one used by those who study the spaces between dimensions. If there truly is such a person here, they might know enough to help you repair the barriers, Marcus finished, without requiring you to sacrifice yourself in the process. Perhaps, Zythrax said cautiously. But even with assistance, the ritual would require us to reach the Nexus point, and that location is more heavily guarded than any installation in Confederacy space. Marcus grinned, the expression fierce in the dim light. Then it's a good thing we're about to have our own ship and a crew of very motivated individuals with nothing left to lose. He began downloading the ship's technical specifications, prisoner, locations, and security protocols onto his Universal Translator's memory banks. The device wasn't designed for such extensive data storage, but it would hold enough information to begin planning their revolution. How long until the next guard check? Marcus asked. Approximately 4 hours, Zythrax replied. Perfect. That gives us time to contact some of our future allies. Marcus stood and began examining the cell's energy barrier, looking for ways to modify or bypass it temporarily. Tell me, Zythrax, how do you feel about starting a war? The dragon's massive head turned toward him, golden eyes gleaming with an emotion that Marcus was only beginning to recognize as hope mixed with righteous fury. Human, Zythrax said softly. I've been waiting 3 centuries for this opportunity. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of careful preparation. Marcus had managed to establish communication with 3 other cells by exploiting a flaw in the ship's internal monitoring system. The energy barriers that contained the prisoners operated on a specific frequency, but the monitoring equipment used a slightly different one. By modulating his universal translator to broadcast on the gap between frequencies, he could send short messages without triggering security alerts. His first contact had been with the Scholar of the Deep Paths, who turned out to be a being called Vith, a member of a species Marcus had never encountered. Vith claimed to be over 800 years old and possessed knowledge that predated the Confederacy by millennia. More importantly, Vith confirmed Zythrax's fears about the weakening dimensional barriers and added a crucial piece of information. The barriers weren't just failing randomly. They were being deliberately weakened. The Confederacy believes they can control the void spawn, Vith had whispered through the communication link. They think their technology can contain entities that existed before the birth of stars. They are preparing to unleash them again, this time to eliminate all opposition to their rule permanently. The second contact had been with Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the former Confederacy scientists. She had been arrested for refusing to participate in something called Project Dissolution and had spent the last 2 years in various Confederacy prisons. Her expertise in quantum mechanics and dimensional physics made her invaluable to their mission. The third contact had been the most surprising. Commander Thale Windstrider, a Zephyrian military officer who had been imprisoned for refusing to carry out what he termed genocide protocols against civilian populations. His knowledge of Confederacy military procedures and this ship's specific security systems would prove crucial to their escape plan. We have the beginning of a team. Marcus reported to Zythrax as they finalized their preparations. But we need more time to contact the others and coordinate our efforts. Time is a luxury we may not have, Zythrax replied, his enhanced hearing detecting something Marcus couldn't. The guard rotation has changed. They are moving additional security personnel into position around the detention areas. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Do you think they suspect something? Unknown. But we must assume our communications have been detected, or that someone among the prisoners has informed the guards of unusual activity. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor confirmed Zythrax's concerns. But instead of the usual pair of guards, Marcus could hear at least 6 sets of feet approaching their cell. Through their communication link he heard Dr. Vasquez's voice, tight with fear. They're coming for all of us. Emergency lockdown protocols are activating throughout the ship. Change of plans, Marcus said, moving quickly to the hidden control panel. We go now or we don't go at all. The cargo systems aren't fully prepared, Zythrax warned. And we haven't established contact with enough prisoners to ensure a successful rebellion. Then we make do with what we have, Marcus replied, his fingers flying over the controls. Sometimes the best plan is the one you make up as you go along. The approaching guards were speaking rapidly in their clicking language, and even without a translator the urgency in their voices was clear. Marcus could see lights flashing in the corridor. The ship's alert status was definitely changing. Zythrax, I need you to be ready to move the instant this wall opens, Marcus said, initiating the cargo system startup sequence. The loading mechanism will create an opening large enough for you to fit through, but it'll only stay open for about 30 seconds before emergency systems kick in. Where exactly will this opening lead? The dragon asked. According to the schematics, directly into the main cargo bay, Marcus replied. From there, we can access the ship's central computer core and the armory. The hidden panels began to glow as ancient systems came online for the first time in centuries. Marcus could feel vibrations through the floor as massive mechanical systems awakened in the walls around them. Warning lights began flashing throughout the detention area, and the sound of running feet grew louder. They know something is happening, Scythrax observed. Good, Marcus said grimly. Let them come. The more guards we draw to this area, the fewer there will be defending the critical systems. The cargo loading mechanism engaged with a sound like thunder. The false wall that had concealed it for so long cracked and began to slide apart, revealing an opening that led into darkness. Emergency alarms started blaring throughout the ship, and Marcus could hear guards shouting orders in at least 3 different languages. Go! Marcus shouted over the noise. Scythrax didn't need to be told twice. The dragon moved with surprising grace for something so large, flowing through the opening like water despite his massive size. Marcus followed immediately, diving through just as the loading mechanism began to reverse. Behind them, he could hear the energy barrier to their cell fluctuating as the ship's systems tried to compensate for the unexpected breach. They found themselves in a cargo bay that was larger than some city blocks. Massive support columns stretched up into darkness, and the walls were lined with loading equipment that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. But Marcus's attention was immediately drawn to something else. This wasn't an empty storage area. The bay contained dozens of containers, each one bearing Confederacy military markings. What is this? Scythrax asked. Moving to examine one of the containers. Marcus accessed the cargo manifest through his universal translator, scanning the contents lists with growing alarm. Weapons, he said quietly. Experimental weapons. Things labeled Dimensional Destabilizer, Reality Anchor System, Void Breach Generator. They're building weapons to fight the Void Spawn, Scythrax realized. Or to control them. Or to create new breaches in the dimensional barriers, Marcus added, reading deeper into the manifest. According to this, half of these weapons are designed to tear holes in reality itself. The implications were staggering. The Confederacy wasn't just planning to unleash the Void Spawn again, they were developing weapons that could potentially destroy the barriers protecting the universe permanently. We need to get this information to the Resistance. Movements, Marcus said. If other species knew what the Confederacy was really planning. First, we need to survive the next 10 minutes, Scythrax interrupted. Listen. Marcus could hear it now, the sound of troops moving through the corridors around the cargo bay. Lots of troops. The ship's entire security force was being deployed, and they were surrounding the area systematically. The central computer core, Marcus said, pointing toward a corridor that led deeper into the ship. If we can reach it, we can shut down their tracking systems and free the other prisoners. And the armory? 1 deck down, according to the schematics. But Scythrax, there's something else. These experimental weapons, some of them might be exactly what we need to repair the dimensional barriers permanently. The dragon's eyes widened. You mean to steal Confederacy weapons and use them against the Void Spawn? I mean to turn their own weapons against them, Marcus clarified. If they've developed technology to manipulate dimensional barriers, we might be able to modify it to strengthen the barriers instead of weakening them. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the cargo bay as the guards attempted to breach the sealed doors. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the Confederacy forces reached their position. Dr. Vasquez would know how to modify the weapons, Marcus continued, moving toward the corridor that led to the computer core. And Commander Windstrider could help us coordinate the other prisoners. We just need to reach them. And if we're captured before we can contact them? Marcus checked his improvised equipment and smiled grimly. Then we make sure we go down fighting. Come on, let's go start a revolution. They moved into the corridor just as the first guards broke through into the cargo bay. Shouts of alarm followed them as the Zephyrians discovered the massive dragon footprints in the dust and realized exactly what they were dealing with. But by then, Marcus and Zathrax were already 3 levels deeper in the ship, moving toward the heavily protected computer core that controlled every system on the vessel. Behind them, alarms continued to blare as the guards found the experimental weapons cache. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that the Confederacy's secret arsenal had just been exposed to the very prisoners they had been planning to use it against. Now they just had to stay alive long enough to turn that knowledge into action. Next stop, Marcus called over his shoulder as they approached a heavily secured door marked with warning symbols in a dozen languages. The brain of this ship. Time to teach the Confederacy what humans do to bullies. The computer core security door was a masterpiece of Confederacy engineering, 3 feet of reinforced metal, embedded with sensors that could detect everything from unauthorized genetic patterns to hostile intentions. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken a team of specialists hours to breach. Zathrax made it through in 12 seconds. I may have been overly dramatic about the security, the dragon admitted as he stepped over the melted remains of the door, his claws still glowing with residual heat from the plasma he had generated. Dragon fire operates at temperatures that most Confederacy engineers never considered. Marcus whistled softly as they entered the computer core. The chamber was a cathedral of technology, with data processing towers stretching up into darkness and holographic displays showing the status of every system on the ship. At the center sat a control throne designed for Zephyrian physiology, but Marcus could see how to modify it for human use. How long before they realize we're here? Marcus asked, moving to the primary control interface. The thermal signature from my plasma breath will register on their sensors within minutes, Zathrax replied. After that, perhaps 10 minutes before they can organize a response. The computer core has independent defensive systems that will activate once they realize the central door has been breached. Marcus was already working his way through the ship's computer systems, his universal translator helping him navigate the alien interfaces. The Confederacy's data security was impressive, but it had one critical flaw: it was designed to keep people out, not to prevent someone from inside the system from accessing everything at once. I'm in, Marcus announced, pulling up the prisoner control systems. All cell barriers are under central control, and I can see the locations of every captive on the ship. There are more than I thought, over 300 individuals from 68 different species. Can you release them all simultaneously? Yes, but that would be chaos. We need to be more strategic. Marcus studied the prisoner manifest, identifying key individuals. I'm going to release the people we need first: Dr. Vasquez, Commander Windstrider, Scholar Vith, and about a dozen others with useful skills. Then we arm them and let them help us organize the others. Marcus found the armory control systems and began unlocking weapons storage. The ship carried enough equipment to outfit a small army, including personal energy weapons, body armor, and portable shield generators. More importantly, the armory contained technical equipment that could be used to modify the experimental weapons they had discovered in the cargo bay. There, Marcus said, executing the first phase of prisoner releases. Dr. Vasquez and the others should be free now. I'm sending them directions to reach the armory. Zathrax had positioned himself near the chamber entrance, listening for approaching guards. I hear movement in the corridors above us. They're organizing search teams. Marcus continued working through the ship's systems, accessing everything from environmental controls to the navigation computer. What he found in the navigation logs made him pause. Zathrax, look at this. According to the flight records, this ship has visited the Nexus Point. Impossible, the dragon said, moving to look at the display. The Nexus Point is restricted to Confederacy leadership only. Not anymore, apparently. They've been making regular trips there for the past 6 months. And look at this, they've been transporting specific prisoners there, people with expertise in ancient technologies. Marcus pulled up the manifest for those transfers. They're not just trying to control the void spawn. they're trying to break the dimensional barriers completely. The implications hit them both at the same time. If the Confederacy succeeded in destroying the barriers, they wouldn't just unleash the void spawn, they would give those entities unlimited access to every dimension that existed. It would be the end of not just their universe, but every possible universe. We need to get to the nexus point, Zythrax said urgently. If they're close to completing their project ... then we need to stop them, Marcus agreed. But first, we need this ship and everyone on it. A new voice crackled through the communication system Marcus had established. Human Marcus, this is Dr. Vasquez. I've reached the armory with Commander Windstrider and 8 others. We're accessing the weapons now, but we're seeing things here that are deeply disturbing. What kind of things? Marcus asked. Weapons designed to fracture reality at the quantum level. Devices that can erase matter from existence. Technology that... There was a pause, then Dr. Vasquez's voice returned, tight with fear. Marcus, some of these weapons aren't meant to fight the void spawn. They're meant to summon them. Marcus felt cold dread settling in his stomach. How many of these summoning devices are there? Dozens. And according to the deployment schedules I'm finding, they're being distributed to Confederacy forces throughout the galaxy. They're planning simultaneous attacks, Marcus realized. Open breaches everywhere at once, then try to control what comes through. Arrogant fools, Zythrax snarled. The void spawn cannot be controlled. They are entropy-given form, destruction incarnate. The Confederacy will doom every living thing in the universe. Commander Windstrider's voice joined the communication. Human Marcus, I've accessed the ship's security systems from here. You have Confederacy Special Forces boarding the ship through the auxiliary docks. Approximately 200 soldiers armed with experimental weapons. Can you delay them? I can seal some of the corridors, but they'll be through in perhaps 20 minutes. 20 minutes to complete a revolution and escape with 300 prisoners. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with impossible odds. Dr. Vasquez, how long would it take to modify those summoning devices to do the opposite, to strengthen the dimensional barriers instead of weakening them? With the right equipment and assistance, perhaps 6 hours of work. But Marcus, the power requirements would be enormous. We'd need access to a major energy source. Like a ship's main reactor? That might work, but the energy discharge would be visible across several star systems. Every Confederacy ship in the sector would know exactly where we were. Then we better make sure we finish the job before they get here, Marcus replied. Commander Windstrider, I'm releasing all remaining prisoners. Can you coordinate their movement to defensive positions? Acknowledged. But Human Marcus, there is something you must know. Among the prisoners being held in the maximum security section are 3 members of the Confederacy High Council. They were arrested for opposing Project Dissolution. Marcus nearly fell out of the control chair. We're holding Confederacy Council members? Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I wasn't certain they could be trusted. But given what we've learned about the experimental weapons, Windstrider paused. They may be our only hope of stopping the project through official channels. Or they could be spies planted to identify dissidents, Zythrax pointed out grimly. Marcus considered their options. The sound of cutting tools was getting closer. The Confederacy forces were making steady progress toward the computer core. Soon they would have to abandon their position and fight their way through the ship. We don't have time for careful evaluation, Marcus decided. Commander Windstrider, release the council members, but keep them under guard. Dr. Vasquez, start working on modifying those weapons. Everyone else, prepare for boarding action. Marcus activated the ship's internal communication system, broadcasting to all 300 newly freed prisoners. Attention, everyone. This is Marcus Chun, Terran Defense Force. The Confederacy has been using this ship to transport weapons designed to end the universe. They've been planning to unleash entities that will consume every living thing in existence. Right now, Confederacy forces are boarding this ship to stop us from interfering with their plan. He paused, then continued. I know many of you have suffered under Confederacy rule. I know you've lost homes, families, entire worlds to their expansion. Today we have a chance to strike back. Not just for revenge, but to save everything that ever was or ever could be. Marcus looked at Zythrax, who nodded encouragement, then continued his broadcast. We're going to take this ship. We're going to use their own weapons against them. And then we're going to the most heavily defended location in Confederacy space to stop them from destroying the universe. He activated the visual displays throughout the ship, showing the experimental weapons data they had discovered. This is what they're planning. This is what we're going to stop. Who's with us? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices in dozens of languages echoed through the communication system as 300 prisoners from across the galaxy declared their intention to fight. Marcus smiled grimly as he began the final phase of his plan, taking complete control of the ship's systems. Zythrax, I hope you're ready for this, because we're about to find out whether humans really are as crazy as everyone thinks. Human Marcus, the dragon replied, flames beginning to dance around his claws. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The battle for the ship was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. 300 desperate prisoners armed with stolen Confederacy weapons faced off against 200 elite Special Forces soldiers in corridors that had never been designed for warfare. The ship itself became a weapon as Marcus and Zythrax used the computer systems to turn the Confederacy's own technology against them. Sealing Bulkhead 7 Alpha. Marcus reported through the communication network as he trapped a squad of soldiers in a service corridor. Dr. Vasquez, how's the progress on those modified weapons? Faster than expected, came the reply from the armory. It turns out the summoning devices and barrier reinforcement systems use nearly identical technology, they just operate in reverse. Scholar Vith has been incredibly helpful. The being's knowledge of dimensional mathematics is extraordinary. Marcus could hear weapons fire echoing through the ship's corridors, but the reports coming through his communication system were encouraging. The former prisoners were fighting with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose, while the Confederacy soldiers were increasingly confused by the ship's systems working against them. Commander Windstrider, status report, Marcus called. We've secured the main armory and both reactor chambers, the Zephyrian officer replied. The Confederacy forces are trapped in the forward sections. But Marcus, the High Council members want to speak with you directly. Can it wait? We're kind of in the middle of something here. They claim they can stop Project Dissolution entirely if you can get them to the nexus point. Apparently, they have override codes that could shut down the entire program. Marcus exchanged glances with Zythrax. Override codes? I am Counselor. Zeth Morfine. A new voice broke into the communication. Former head of the Confederacy Science Directorate. The experimental weapons program was initiated without proper council approval. If we can reach the nexus point before the final phase begins, I can use my authority codes to abort the operation. And if this is a trap? Zythrax asked. Then we are no worse off than before, the counselor replied. But Human Marcus, you should know that the timeline has accelerated. According to the intelligence reports I've seen, the Confederacy plans to activate all summoning devices simultaneously in 72 hours. Marcus felt the weight of that deadline settle on his shoulders. 72 hours to cross half the galaxy, reach the most heavily defended location in Confederacy space, and stop the end of the universe. Well, he said to Zythrax, at least we won't be bored. The dragon's rumbling laughter was interrupted by alarms throughout the ship. Marcus quickly accessed the external sensors and saw what had triggered them. A Confederacy dreadnought had just dropped out of hyperspace nearby. New problem, Marcus announced to everyone. We've got company, big company. How big? Dr. Vasquez asked. Marcus read the sensor data with growing concern. Dreadnought-class battleship. Approximately 50 times our size, armed with enough firepower to crack a planet. Can we run? Commander Windstrider inquired. Not without finishing the weapons modifications first, Dr. Vasquez replied. We need another 2 hours minimum. Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. The prison ship was armed, but its weapons were designed for suppressing riots, not fighting capital ships. In a straight fight, they would last perhaps 30 seconds. Zythrax, Marcus said suddenly, how accurately can you remember the layout of Confederacy installations? Perfectly. Why? Because I just realized something? This isn't a prison ship anymore, it's a Trojan horse. Marcus began pulling up the ship's communication systems. The Confederacy thinks their special forces are still in control here. What if we convinced them that they've succeeded in retaking the ship? Understanding dawned in Zythrax's golden eyes. You want to deceive the dreadnought into allowing us to approach other Confederacy installations. Exactly. We broadcast a fake victory signal, claim we've recaptured the ship, and need to transport the prisoners to a more secure facility. Meanwhile, Dr. Vasquez finishes modifying the weapons, and we use our new Trojan horse to get close to targets we could never approach otherwise. The risk is enormous, Commander Windstrider pointed out. If they discover the deception, then we fight, Marcus replied simply. But if it works, we turn this from a desperate escape into a systematic campaign against their weapons program. Counselor Morfine's voice crackled through the communication system. Human Marcus, that plan has merit. I still have valid authorization codes. I could order the dreadnought to escort us to the nexus point directly. Can we trust the codes? Zythrax asked. There's only one way to find out, Marcus said, moving to the ship's main communication array. Commander Windstrider, I need you to broadcast standard Confederacy military protocols. Make it look like you've retaken control of the ship and are requesting new orders. The next few minutes were some of the longest in Marcus's life. They watched on the tactical display as the massive dreadnought approached, its weapon systems powered but not actively targeting them. Commander Windstrider's performance was flawless, sending the exact protocols and authentication codes that a loyal Confederacy officer would use. When the reply came, Marcus felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. Prison ship Dominion, this is dreadnought inevitable. Congratulations on suppressing the prisoner revolt. You are ordered to proceed immediately to Nexus Point for prisoner transfer to maximum security facility. We will provide escort. It worked, Dr. Vasquez breathed over the communication system. Phase 1 worked, Marcus corrected. Now comes the hard part. As they prepared to jump to hyperspace under the escort of the Confederacy's most powerful warship, Marcus reviewed the modified weapons Dr. Vasquez had created, instead of tearing. Holes in reality, they would now strengthen the dimensional barriers permanently. But the energy requirements were staggering. They would need to drain the power from multiple star systems to generate enough force to seal the breaches throughout the galaxy. There's something else. Scholar Vith had joined the communication network. While working on the weapon modifications, I discovered that the void spawn incursions aren't random. They're being directed by something on the other side of the barriers. Something that has been planning this assault for eons. What kind of something? Marcus asked. The records I've studied suggest a collective intelligence of unimaginable age and power. The individual void spawn we've encountered are merely scouts, advance agents for something far worse. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. You're saying there's something behind the void spawn? Something that's been orchestrating all of this? The destruction of the Draconis Imperium, the corruption of the Confederacy, the weakening of the dimensional barriers, all of it appears to be part of a vast plan spanning millennia. Zythrax's golden eyes blazed with sudden understanding and fury. The hunger, he whispered. The ancient texts spoke of it, but we thought it was mythology. A consciousness that existed in the void before creation, seeking to return everything to emptiness. If that's true, Marcus said slowly, then stopping the Confederacy's weapons program isn't enough. We need to close the dimensional breaches permanently, and we need to do it before this hunger entity realizes what we're planning. The hyperspace. Jump began, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of reality shifting around them. Somewhere ahead lay the Nexus Point, the most heavily defended location in Confederacy space. Somewhere beyond that lay the source of the dimensional barriers and the key to saving the universe. 71 hours remaining, Marcus announced to his unlikely crew of revolutionaries. Time to save everything that has ever existed or ever could exist. As their stolen prison ship hurtled through hyperspace toward its destiny, escorted by the very forces they intended to deceive, Marcus allowed himself one moment to appreciate the absolute insanity of their situation. A human pilot, an ancient dragon, 300 liberated prisoners, and stolen experimental weapons against an enemy that had been planning the end of existence since before the birth of stars. You know what the best part is? Marcus said to Zythrax as they prepared for what would likely be the most important battle in the history of the universe. What? Marcus grinned with the fierce joy of someone who had found exactly the right impossible fight. They never saw us coming. In the depths of space, the dreadnought Inevitable continued its escort mission, completely unaware that it was protecting the very force that would ultimately destroy everything its creators had worked to achieve. And in the spaces between dimensions, something ancient and patient felt the first stirrings of concern as plans millions of years in the making began to unravel. The universe held its breath and prepared for war.